Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's conclave. My name is Benjamin Moore, and I am a co-founder here at The Sacred Synthesis and also co-executive director, along with my beautiful partner, Cynthia Cremblett, who will not be joining this presentation and will be supporting in spirit. So really, really excited to bring forward this important topic of DMT and 5-MeO-DMT and how they work in the brain and in the body, and these different serotonergic systems that they effectuate. So without further ado, let's drop in. So as I was doing research on today's presentation, I came across some very interesting information. What I found was some things that perhaps aren't communicated, and perhaps this is due to the limited research, or people sometimes don't even know what DMT is or 5-MeO-DMT is and what's going on here. So what I found was that our skin cells actually have 5-HT1A and 5-HT2A receptors. Our bone cells, our smooth muscle cells, glial cells, obviously central nervous system cells, and really any nerve in our body has these receptors. And why this is interesting is, as I've been a practitioner of these medicines for many years and witnessing the unfolding of people's experience as they're undergoing the medicine, I've always been curious as to what's happening. And on the surface, I sort of can glean some insight as to what's unfolding, what's being released, what's being seen. But the science is really kind of coming in and showing me where I was right and where I wasn't. So I really am excited to bring forward this information that will help clear some of this up and perhaps give you some information on how to apply these different technologies to your experience, which will help you deepen your relationship with yourself, with God, and expand your potential in this life. So I'm going to get into some of the science and some of the more cerebral information first. And then we'll talk about some of the differences and some of the mystical aspects as well. So first, we're going to talk a little about the nervous system and how it's working in the body and how these medicines effectuate or influence the nervous system. So your brain is constantly predicting reality. So you taking information about your experience that you've had in the past and applying it to how you can be in life and predict the future, what's happening. And this lends to predicting who you are, what's safe, what matters, what's threatening, perhaps what you deserve. And these predictions are built on neural circuits that are used frequently. And serotonin is one of the main chemicals that tunes those circuits. And then within that, two serotonin receptors, which are especially relevant in this talk, are the 5-HT1A, which modulates regulation, and the 5-HT2A, which modulates amplification. And when these receptors activate strongly, your experience of reality can shift dramatically. So first, we're going to talk about 5-MeO-DMT and the 5-HT1A axis. So the 5-HT1A receptor is highly expressed in the serotonin control center, which is the RAF nuclei within emotional processing in the limbic system, and memory context in the hippocampus, and regulation and inhibition in the prefrontal cortex. And function 5-HT1A activation decreases excessive neural firing, reduces stress output, increases parasympathetic influence, modulates fear circuits, stabilizes emotional tone. In plain language, it presses the nervous system's regulatory center. And so what does 5-MeO-DMT do here? It has a strong affinity for 5-HT1A receptors. So 1,000 times greater affinity for the 5-HT1A than the 5-HT2A receptor. It still can bind there, but if there's availability in the 5-HT1A receptor, it's going to go there. And so when it's activated, serotonin neuron firing shifts rapidly. Autonomic tone changes immediately. Stress circuits quiet. Self-referential processing destabilizes. Experientially, this feels like rapid eco-dissolution, the collapse of a defensive identity, overwhelming surrender, loss of narrative self, emotional purging, deep silence after intensity. And many people describe it as a connection to God. Everything drops away. There's nothing left to hold on to. The system is empty. And so biologically, this may reflect as a sudden quieting of self-protective neural loops. And the brain basically releases its grip on identity, which is where we create these different defensive postures or other artifacts of our experience. So, and 5-HT1A or 5-MeO-DMT is a very somatic medicine. And because it influences the autonomic regulation, people often experience deep exhalations. So when you're in the medicine, there is a deep surrender to the breath. And typically the breathing shifts from chest to belly breathing, which is really where you want to be breathing. If you can breathe in awareness, you want to always be breathing with your belly. But oftentimes we get into sympathetic breathing, which is chest breathing. And we can go into that at a later time. But when we activate this part of our nervous system with 5-MeO, the breathing shifts from the chest down into the belly region. And that helps to activate the vagus nerve and tone the vagus nerve, which reduces our vigilance. And through that, waves of warmth, oftentimes there's a lot of purging through crying or spitting. A lot of things are coming out at this time because nothing's being held on to anymore. And these expressions are able to emerge. And sometimes there is a lot of movement and yelling, things like that come forward, which we've been holding on to. Yes, so moving into highlighting some 5-HT2A and DMT aspects. And so DMT and the 5-HT2A axis is what is sometimes called the amplification pathway. And so the 5-HT2A is concentrated heavily in the cortical pyramidal neurons. And so these neurons integrate perception, generate narrative, construct identity, assign meaning, and they link sensory data to symbolic interpretation. Whereas meaning that your sensory experience, what you're feeling, seeing, smelling, tasting, all modulates and is written through this receptor. And so when this receptor is activated, it releases glutamate, cortical excitation increases, network boundaries soften, the predictive models loosen, and global connectivity rises. So your brain is able to communicate at a wider range of places. And the brain becomes more flexible and less filtered. The experiential signature often includes, when you're going into this experience, what you may experience within the medicine is geometric visuals, hyper detailed imagery, almost so clear that it's beyond the clarity of your waking life. And entity encounters, so encountering entities and other beings, perhaps as we go beyond the structured world of reality. And then rapid insights that can come in what we call downloads or connections with our guides. And this is the amplification of signal. This enables us to be more connected to this energetic world. And the brain now is allowing material to emerge that would normally be suppressed. So all these different structures that create rigidity and focus are softened and loosened so that we can zoom out and see more of this experience that we've been missing. And somatically, 5-HT2A can be experienced as sort of energy surges, vibrations in the body, sometimes involuntary movements. The body can feel more alive. In my experience, I've had these deep senses of physical surrender, but also feeling extremely empowered and activated, like I'm going through almost like an energetic expansion. So there's a feeling there that is sort of unique to that experience. And it tends to reduce rumination, reframe some trauma through visual stimulation, and allows us to see differently, since the 5-HT1A, or excuse me, 5-HT2A DMT axis is primarily activated through the visual cortex. It changes because of it's almost like oversaturation of that sensor. It changes how we're seeing reality because of this stimulation. So it's a very interesting outcome through the experience. And so 5-HT1A often produces feelings of surrender, dissolution through quieting, emotional clearing, and autonomic reset. And the 5-HT2A receptor often produces visual sensations of expansion, dissolution through amplification. That's like an overwhelm of sensation. It's like, boom, go too much. It's like going in a rocket out into space. You get this like massive experience and then surrender. Cognitive restructuring, perceptual flexibility. And both of these can lead to transformation. Both of these receptors, when we agonize or stimulate these receptors, they both lead to transformation, though they operate through unique individual levers. And so the healing, as we so aptly coin the coming back to oneself or the remembering, it's not necessarily about healing the receptors, repairing the receptors, but it comes through as a state disruption. So whatever state you're in, it shakes everything up and disrupts the patterns of how we identify ourselves, how we see the world, the lenses that we have created for ourselves, and it enables us to be once again in a neuroplastic or a learning mind. And so it allows us to integrate meaning, new meanings, new perspectives as we move into our life, change how we behave, how we show up and communicate, and calms the threat system, allows emotional discharge. So as I was sharing earlier, like yelling, spitting, crying, like allowing these emotions that have been suppressed to wallow up and move. And yeah, it restores regulatory tone, which I think is very, very vital. So being in a state of balance, and not saying that we should be in balance in our daily life, but having an emotional balance allows us to expand, to go up or to go down, to go anywhere we need to be, to allow emotional processing and emotional purging. Because if we're stuck in one state low, state high, it doesn't allow us to connect to the other places where we are naturally attuned to going. And as human beings, we need to be able to access those different various feelings so we can move this energy that sometimes can get accumulated in our system. And so why after these experiences do some people feel reset, or most people feel reset? Because chronic stress in the body builds rigidity. Rigidity is, and if you have it, I'm sure I have some, and that I'm always working through, but I do a good job at adding more because of my lifestyle and my mission. Chronic stress is typically held in the neck and shoulders, upper back, sometimes mid back, and in the physical realm, and it builds rigidity, so the body can become very stiff. So what these molecules can do is tone the nervous system, tone the muscles in the body, since these muscles have smooth muscles and our nerve endings have both of these receptors. So when you stimulate these receptors, they go into wanting to get back into balance. So if they've been holding tension, if they've been holding activation, they can go back into balance and start releasing some of the tension that's being held. Through that, our breath changes, breathing through the belly, it activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which now reduces our vigilance and our threat response, which goes back into reducing chronic stress and adding to the tension that we hold, reducing all of the things that we're carrying, and it allows us to be more connected to our parasympathetic nervous system. So we want to have access to our sympathetic nervous system so we can turn on, activate, interact with the world when needed, but then when we're not, go back into a parasympathetic state. Think of like an alligator, crocodile, very calm, very slow. And then when it needs to, when it's time to eat or respond, it can strike rapidly. And so that's the state sort of we want to be in an optimal way, be in a calm, let's say like repair state where we can be repairing ourselves. And then when we need to turn it on, we can go. And that comes from a neutral emotional state or energetic state. And our system is so intelligent, very intelligent. Our body, as I said, we have these different receptors all over ourselves. And when we take these molecules in, they engage these different areas where it's needed and where we're holding stress. And so these these different molecules are like keys, and these keys fit locks in the body. And obviously they're unique keys that fit unique locks. And so we want to make sure that we're framing these things responsibly. Just to share with you, there's always more and more research that's happening, that's coming forward, which is always very exciting for us. For me, a lot of it is confirming my suspicions, and witnessing people go through these different various processes is really a great joy and enables me to continue on my process and my journey working with these different medicines. And I'll get a little bit later in this talk, I'll share sort of my approach to working with both of these in a container that I call a temple session, and it'll get really exciting and perhaps something that you would be interested in trying yourself. And so I'm going to shift from some of the scientific approaches, and we're going to round this out with a little bit of mystical, a layperson, but just mystical, my kind of language. I get lost in the science. It's important for us to know and understand. Yeah. So first question is, why is DMT often called the God molecule? And obviously in the brain, it engages the 5-HT1A system. And so what does that do? Well, it quiets our resistance. It lowers our resistance and enables us to actually connect with what we call here at the church, unity consciousness. And unity consciousness can be said as like God, the all, creator, source. It seems to be a place where everything is the same. There is no variance. There is no duality. This is a non-dual place. And it feels like where everything comes from. And if everything is the same, when we go back and look, where we go down and down and down and down and down into looking at these things with instruments like microscopes, and other ways to visualize things even smaller, what we start to notice is at the base element, all of these things are connected with the same thing. Basic elements, molecules. And beyond that, before molecules, there are subatomic particles, and many of them are the same. So there's a sameness as we go down, down, down into the smallest element of creation. And then these things bind together and they stack together and create these three-dimensional structures. And so if you can go beyond these structures that have been created, there is a non-duality that I see, that I experience. And the first experience I had with 5-MeO-DMT, everything was dissolved. Everything was gone. And I was left with this like orb of white crystalline light. That was it. There was no other colors. There was no textures. It was just like this. And I was almost as if it was part of me. I was it, and it was me. And I felt this peace. It was just bliss. There was nothing. However, there was nothing there. It was almost as if I was relating myself as a human to this place that was without gravity, that was without story. And it felt peaceful. And I was like, boom, I just kept surrendered completely into that experience. And then as I started to land from the experience, it became a sense of what we can call duality, but I started to come in, and then colors started to appear and shapes started to appear, and I came back into this dual experience and realized that I had essentially exploded into everything. And this is what I felt as a connection to God. And simply said as that is what it felt like. And the term God molecule, as so aptly coined, it points to this phenomenology. And not necessarily because the molecules create God, but because it removes our identification or our relationship with a dualistic experience and enables us to experience reality as if we were everything. And to me, that's what God is. You may have a different definition, but when we can be in totality, wow, like what's possible? So, and then DMT, NN-DMT is typically known as the spirit molecule. So because DMT amplifies the 5-HT2A axis, it can increase the intensity of our visual cortex and the way we connect to the energetic world around us. Because this cross-network communication expands, the imagery that we're experiencing becomes hyper-realistic. Oftentimes, the narrative that we have leaves and it's replaced with what seems to be an otherworldly view of another dimension, perhaps, or an interdimension that we're experiencing all the time, that it's unavailable to us because we're so involved in this reality. And oftentimes it can come forward as like beings or what people call entities, which may be anamorphic or human shaped, but not necessarily human faced, or it could be various different sort of animalistic structures. I've seen beings that were, moving energy of the universe through them, and they had arms and legs, but no face. They were just blank and just like covered in patterns and colors and just doing the work. And I'm like, okay, I understand what's going on here. Like at first it's like, oh my gosh, they can see me. And realizing, of course they can. Of course they can. There's nowhere to hide because they're in this elemental realm. But we can't hide from them. So if we accept them, accept this existence, it makes it easier. And it releases some of the resistance of having to know. And then sometimes we encounter like some archetypal beings. So some things that we relate to that help us identify and relate to the world. Expansive cosmic architecture. And then, in this place, I've never experienced language or spoken words or anything of that nature. But there seems to be some sort of energetic communication. Like here on Earth, we would call it telepathy. But in this other realm, maybe it would be just the languages that are used. And obviously it increases the connectivity in the brain in this realm. And what that allows us to do is almost like, as I said before, like amplify our connection, amplify our antenna. And so, it sort of brings these elements of this and that reality together for us to experience. And so, here, we'll just kind of sum that up in just a few words. And so the 5-HT1A pathway often leads to feelings of unity, silence, dissolution, and allness, as it were, like the feeling of the all. And then the 5-HT2A pathway, which DMT primarily targets, leads to visions, cosmic experience, cosmic expansion, otherworldly experiences, and seems like cross-dimensional travel. And what we say, like going to another dimension, I like to say interdimensional, going through ourselves into another place. And both of these things reveal dimensions of the mind that are typically inaccessible to ordinary states. Scientifically, they bind to these receptors, which allows us to see more of the thing. And this is really a bridge, in my view, between science and the mystical. Where science it's almost as if like a language. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a difference. It just means that we're studying something and we're naming it so we can identify it and share the information. The mystical is more of a trust. Like this is happening, this is what's being observed, and we'll keep moving in that direction. And so, it's been really amazing to bring this forward to you. Oh yeah, one more thing before we end. So I talked a little earlier about sort of the approaches that I like to use personally with these two unique molecules, and what I call a temple session, which is a hybrid experience where I'm mixing DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. And no, I'm not working with them simultaneously. They are being used in a series or back to back. And so most people, say like maybe practitioners or most individuals, if they're working with both, will typically, as they work themselves up the chakras, are working with DMT first and then 5-MeO-DMT second. And while it can be a useful approach, what science is showing is that when you stimulate the 5-HT1A receptor, it actually reduces the psychedelic or activating effects of the 5-HT2A receptor. And so what I like to do, my approach, is working with 5-MeO-DMT first and then DMT second. And the reason for that is I imagine, and in my experiences, what it's shown me is that DMT can rapidly shift how you see reality. However, it's going to go through the filter or the narrative first of what your experience has been. So some of these beings, some of these entities, some of these realms have a close relationship to as I shared before, the archetype that we relate to, or a reality that we've experienced over and over. Sometimes other people's experiences or artwork can influence our experience. So I went on a quest to understand, what if we went into the 5-MeO-DMT compound molecule first and sort of stripped away at all these different narrative structures and stories, and allowed ourselves to completely dissolve our ego and become more connected to oneness, or to the all, or to God, and then went in and used the DMT to visualize the story that wants to emerge from the God consciousness. And so part of our experience, I would do like a 2-hour session where 1 hour is 5-MeO, using varied states of low, middle, and high dose dives, and sort of modulating the experience, coming in and out of these sessions with, or I shouldn't say sessions, like coming in and out of the waves and exploring, and then maybe sometimes I'll be taking notes. And then after about an hour, shifting into working with DMT and enabling the visual cortex, because as we know as humans, our visual cortex is a primary driver in our locomotion and where we go, how we go there, and our storytelling. Going into that, it enabled me, what it felt like to me was to experience other realms without the anamorphic beings. So it was almost as if there was a visual that I was the anamorphic being, and I was able to actually see objective reality around me and not have to feel like I was being influenced by other beings, that I was the one in control of my own destiny, that God was sort of leading me, gave me the space to be connected to everything. And what I liken this to is being in a state of embodiment while also being in a state of expanded consciousness. So if we can be embodied fully in our presence and know our arms, know our legs, know our shape, but also be connected to a limitless consciousness, when we start asking questions of how, all of the answers come, and there's no obstacles. They don't exist. It's like the path becomes clear and you get to go and move in that direction. So it's been fascinating to explore these different various compounds, especially both of these as well. And I'll end with one thing that maybe you can sort of sum all of this up, that DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, if you look at them on a screen or a picture of them, the only difference is you have a methoxy group on the 5th position of 5-MeO-DMT. Other than that, they look visually the same. However, they're not. They're completely unique and independent compounds. So when approaching them, understanding what you're looking for and what the experience is going to be like is very, very important. So hopefully this video, this presentation, has informed you on the different nuanced, unique capabilities of these experiences and how you can further deepen your relationship with yourself and move along on your journey. So thanks so much. Such an honor to present to you today. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to bring more and more and more and more and more of this type of information to you, and also offering all these different experiences as well. So thank you so much, everyone. And y'all have a great, amazing rest of your life. Love.